Brace yourself.
For as long as I can remember, the gaming climate has become infatuated with graphics. Every new generation of consoles introduces us to another round of visual fidelity, a showcase of graphical horsepower. Each new system is an opportunity to make games look even more stunning with hyper-realistic facial expressions and photorealistic scenery. But many gamers have found this ideology of realism to be a missed opportunity in the realm of technology, leaving so many games to look extremely similar to each other. Photorealism remains the benchmark by which next-generation systems are judged, but at the same time this stamps these games with a date that simply doesn't go away. Hyper-realism of the PS2 era simply doesn't compare with the hyper-realism of the PS4 era. While it's certainly impressive to have detailed facial expressions or naturalistic weather effects, these tactics rarely impress as time goes on. It's the reason that we continue to remember the graphics of games like The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, Okami, or Limbo, and not the graphics of the Call of Duties or Assassin's Creeds that continue to populate our current day market. Hyperrealism rarely holds promise for the long term, so is there any real way to avoid that pitfall? Can realism even stand the test of time? Well, that's where Unravel comes in. So here's today's thesis. Unravel uses photorealism creatively, and through its level design, it's able to develop a unique artistic direction for itself, even through the time-stamped method of hyperrealism. Unravel comes from Coldwood Interactive, a small team of developers located in the upper regions of Sweden. Published by EA, Unravel has the mega publisher following in the footsteps of Ubisoft in releasing indie properties at shorter lengths and smaller budgets than AAA juggernauts. Like Valiant Hearts and Child of Light before it, Unravel is a game with indie sensibilities, but with a higher budget and better production values. Released on PC, Xbox One, and PS4 in early February 2016, Unravel follows the journey of Yarny, a small explorer made entirely of yarn who must travel across various environments to discover the stories of a family living in the northern country. With no narration and limited text, Unravel's story is told through humble simplicity, and the game design quickly follows suit. Despite EA helming blockbuster series like Battlefield and Dragon Age games with sky-high production values and even higher budgets, Unravel's art direction is what makes it stand out so much more than its AAA brethren. Thanks to its higher budget and production values, Unravel is one of the few smaller titles that preserve the technological wonder of realism seen in AAA games. Unravel uses realistic lighting, atmospheric weather effects, and detailed facial animations to create scenes and landscapes that are pretty difficult to distinguish from live-action footage. Everything, from the animations of animals on the plains to the steadily increasing fog of a swampy mire, captures hyperrealism, a tremendous rarity for indie-style games. But Unravel's impressive visual design isn't solely based on its technological fidelity. Instead of solely going for photorealism, Unravel designs its levels with a stronger focus on imaginative perspective. Each level is designed to be something that could totally exist in real life. An underground burrow, an ocean pier, even a toxic waste site could all exist beyond mere fantasy. Really, the only thing in Unravel that's unrealistic is Yarny himself, but even the wool-knit protagonist has all the textures and animations that someone of his design and construction would have if it were to suddenly sprout consciousness. This is all preserved in a realistic light, but thanks to how each level is designed and structured, Unravel is able to provide unique perspectives that a typical human couldn't experience. Yarny's small size lets him explore winter treetops or the rafters of a shed, offering a new perspective for the player that couldn't be experienced in the real world. A burrowing groundhog might seem cute and tame to a human, but in Unravel it's one of the closest things to a full-on enemy. Same with disgruntled sea crabs or angry crows. These things that would be simple animals to us end up appearing as giant threats, all thanks to this change in perspective. But what makes this interesting is that this is presented under the aesthetic of photorealism. Everything in Unravel operates under natural physics and realistic actions. Unravel's animals are some of the most lifelike looking animals you'll see in a game today, but a simple change in perspective lets them act unrealistically and more as fantasy hazards. Same goes with the levels themselves. Unravel's stages all follow the typical physical properties of underground caves, rising harbor tides, and even indigenously hazardous fauna. Everything is structured and designed in a way to emulate real-world conditions. Twigs and branches break and lean over time. Ice can shatter if enough weight is brought upon it. And machinery chains and pistons move with a mechanized rhythm. The world Unravel builds is one that closely resembles and moves like any of its components would under realistic conditions, but thanks to Yarny's diminutive perspective, these levels feel fantastic. They feel hazardous and labyrinthine while still being able to stun and awe with the novelty of photorealism. Yarny, as the sole arbiter of fantasy in Unravel, is the cornerstone of this creative spin on the usually fetishistic technological prowess that's become a staple in next-generation systems. He might move in a whimsical and charming way, but he's also the reasons that these levels operate the way they do. It's because of him that tree trunks can become downhill luges and groundhogs can become threatening. He's the reason that we're able to take something that would otherwise feel grounded in reality and make it feel like a fantasy. The construction of the burrows and the webbing of the branches are able to flow to Yarny's movement and unique abilities regarding his own yarn. Thanks to Yarny's perspective, we can see a realistic world in a new way, a way that turns the normal into the surreal. Unravel's fairy tale spirit is what energizes the philosophy of graphic discipline that's become processed and mechanical. Photorealism remains a short-term novelty for video games as it's so vulnerable to obsolescence over time. But Yarny adds that creative touch to this jaded, naturalistic world by giving it an explorative perspective, a curiosity that reshapes many of the structures that build its architecture. It's that artistic spin on photorealism that offers a resistance to the growing fatigue of video game graphic technology. Unravel feels like an artsy indie game despite its use of high-end technology to produce hyper-realistic visual effects and facial animations. This unique vision is why it can stand with other indie games like Limbo and Transistor. It takes the real and makes it fantasy. Unravel is creative photorealism at work. It's a way to take a visual identity that's usually used solely to get people to buy new hardware and give it a touch of magic that lets it feel like art, not business. If more games can follow in Unravel's footsteps, perhaps realistic graphics will be able to conquer their inevitable age and fatigue. And maybe they'll be just as eternally memorable, even when technology moves beyond their own processing power, because Unravel is a grand statement for that.